paradigmatic shifts that we're dealing with. And so I'm going to kind of share a little bit about that. And then I'll share a little bit about how at the core, this is a question about trust. And then I'll talk about what that means in our pedagogy, what that means in our course designs is how we embed trust into that. And that requires recoding a lot of our pedagogy. So I'll talk a little bit about that philosophically, but then show you exactly what I'm talking about. And this is what I use as a computational analogy metaphor in my own work and here around what I call RWX. And you'll see what that means in a second. And then we'll walk through what I call exercises. It's a term that I use that I actually adopted from a qualitative professor years ago at Boston U. She used the word exercises, and I think that's just such a great way to say what it is that we're doing. And so I embed these exercises into my classes, and then how do we build these utilizing AI, but also harnessing AI, meaning the trust questions that we're talking about. And then part of this, and you're going to see it right away in a minute, is this absolutely transformative piece that is coming our way. And I believe we'll be talking about it next year, the same level we're talking about AI broadly, and that's vibe coding. So I'll show it to you right now. And we talked about it in the tech committee yesterday. So let's get grounding first, all right? And I think this kind of represents where we're all at. So we all come with certain, this is beautiful artwork from Adrian Hanft, which I use often to describe where we show up. This is at the heart of all my instruction with leaders and students, and where I think we're all at today. We all already come with a lot of things in our mind, tinkering, how we learned, what we prefer, our preferences, our tendencies. And if I looked at my trajectory as a learner here at UF or as a professor, this really, I mean, I was like, hey, how do I show this? Well, I was like, hey, I'll just do my IDs. Take a look at my, look at that guy right there with the long hair right there. A lot more hair.
Does it look like you?
That's me right there, yes. And that's like the week that I graduated, because that's my alumni Gator 1 card. And when I was a learner here, I was over there at Turlington Hall and here at Norman Hall, and we did it way different, right? We did it with 50 people jam-packed into a classroom, and we did it in a tactile way. When I got my leadership degree, or even as a school leader, our professional development, everything about it was pretty much still tactile. So if I thought about even my own training as a leader, we were in classes, aside from our work throughout the year. I spent an entire summer, 2 summers with my colleagues, 5 days a week. All right, think about that. All day, 5 days a week. That was the instruction I was going through. And then as a professor at the University of Denver, when I first started, and as a professor, we did cohorts that would come in on Saturdays, and then we would do 7-hour days, 6-7-hour days. All right, those days are gone. All right, they're happening in some places, but those pure tactile, high touch, those days are slowly going away, or they've just flipped like that, and even in our own program. So we're trying to find that balance, and I'll show you what I describe visually as that balance. And today, there I am at the bottom, basically just like you guys, navigating where we're at. And so let me just sum up what hasn't changed. What hasn't changed is core competencies, theories, application, standards. That's still what we're trying to teach, but here's what has changed. Yes, generative AI, we're talking about it. In our field, we're in the eye of the storm. So it's affecting everything. But if you take a look at where generative AI is and is heading, virtually every one of these points is our college, all right, and our work. So we are in the eye of the storm on every level, all right? And so that's just one. Here's another one, though, that I feel is affecting my instruction and my pedagogy. What does TLDR stand for? Too long didn't read. All right. I'm becoming, I'm hard coded to read, right? I'm hard. You guys all are probably out there too, but our students slowly are not. All right, and even I am not. All right, so I was actually like, well, let me get the stats on this. So what did I do? I went on there. I did a quick search. I found this, and I immediately went to ChatGPT and I said, please summarize that. All right. And by the way, they're using the Frontiers model already. So I was like, just summarize that. All right. Too long did not read. I'm too long did not read too. But I am absolutely seeing this in my students, whether it's an on-campus class or an off-campus class, synchronous, asynchronous. If I assign something, I can tell that difference between the IDs that I showed you is absolutely there. So I have a choice as an instructor of pedagogy. I can adapt to this, or I can try and bend it like I show my students. It's like we bend a tree, we put a fence around it, we try to do everything we can to make it grow, or we just figure out the soil and the shade a little bit better and figure out how that works. So that's just two things. The asynchronous piece is absolutely huge. In our field, it's basically everything, all right? Even locally, educators in our field, educational leadership, they're working all day and they're not coming here at 5 o'clock at night, even locally. So asynchronous is key. And then lastly, the nuance. The predictability that was there in those early IDs is absolutely gone. In our field alone, the amount of leadership candidates that we get coming in from different backgrounds, the kind of work that they're bringing in, we have students that are not even in schools, but they are in education learning organizations, or they certainly want to lead in that world. So the amount of nuance between styles and needs has absolutely changed. So that's the world we're in. But then there's one last thing. There's one last thing that I think defines this environment, and that is the acceleration. Does everybody feel it? It's just mind-blowing. All right. So the acceleration that we're all facing is insane. And so here's a couple of key assumptions I want to lay out before we even get into the work. So this is a conversation I had with an AI expert recently who rhymes with Aya. I was like, she's doing amazing work. And I was like, hey, look, I'm not an AI expert. And then so she's an expert in AI. And her response was, no one is an expert in AI. So I just kind of heard that, and I'm just like, I think that kind of summed up the idea that we are all muddling, and we are all trying to deal with this environment and this acceleration. Yes, there are experts in LLMs. There are experts in machine learning. There are experts in all of those sub areas. But AI as a whole, everybody in here is an expert. All right. And no one is an expert. We're all doing that. So with that in mind, I just want to clarify that anything I'm sharing today, I'm navigating in real time. It's a beta. I have more questions than answers, and those answers usually come from the students and how many questions they have. Is it clear to them? Because when you know something's not working, that's how you know, right? How many emails, how many times you had to clarify something, you're like, I need to refine that. And then lastly, I'll say this. I know this firmly. We are either in the kitchen or we're going to be on the menu. And I believe in this firmly. All right. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about how I approach this. I shared that picture of what's tinkering in our head at all times. What I'm after in the picture I always show, and it's up in my office, is this. It's a bicycle. It's the perfect balance between human and machine. Keeps you moving forward. You need momentum. You need balance. And it is absolutely a machine, but it is nothing without the person. And that's always what I'm after, is this metaphor in my work. And so it really begins with trust. I write about this, and I explain it to my students in my classes. I take a computational view of this. I think a lot of where our society is today can be described by how we've also designed our technology. And in technology, and in this computer right now, and in this phone, everything can be boiled down to those letters, R, R, W, R, W, X, which stands for, anybody know? Chris?
Read, write, edit.
Read, write, execute, or own. Read, write, own. X is there for execute or own, but it's also edit, right? So we have the choice when we design software. You can design it for read only, read write, or you grant permissions to do all sorts of amazing things. When we first started using the internet, when we first started using software, it was read, write only, and things were crude. But as we began wanting more permissions, we had to grant read, write, execute. But to do that, you have to create elegant code, or it will absolutely bug out. So we began recoding entire platforms and infrastructure. And that's the technology we're in today. It's read, write, execute. And that didn't happen overnight. And for us in our field, I believe our pedagogy is our code. And we have to go back and look at that. And we have to embed executable privileges into that code, into our pedagogy. If you look at it in open source, it can be broken down into 3 trust systems to do that. Take a look at this one in the middle and the right. You can go from the right and you can do what we call substitution of trust. Basically, another way to say that is monitoring. We can monitor. We can put a tool on Canvas or wherever and monitor. That's an option. Go ahead. Inference of trust is trust earned over time based on observed behavior. But I just described that environment that I'm in. And our students are coming in and we might have them one time and they're in and out, or I don't know that I can have inference of trust. I think we can as a team, but it's very difficult to do that in an asynchronous environment with our students or to monitor. So it's choices we make in our code and in our pedagogy, but I am building for assumption of trust, which is building the norms, the culture, and in our case, the pedagogy that already has that trust built in because it's designed hopefully elegantly. And that's the goal of what I'm talking about today. This is a recent one, the AI assessment scale. And so to put it in perspective here, I'm fully committed to this 3, 4, and 5. I'm not building pedagogy at all for the 1 and 2. All right. So others can, absolutely, by all means. If you do that, you'll probably be in the monitoring or inference stage, and that might work. But I'm fully trying to get this embedded in everything that I do. And the example I'll give you today is about that. So I've given you a quick task. We're all coming from different disciplines. So I've come up with one activity or one thing that I want students to learn, and I want you guys to grapple with it for a minute. So take a look at this, and this is called Fiedler's contingency theory. So probably everybody in this room, and we're in an ed leadership program, has been kind of like, or we get the idea that there's just great leaders, all right? Steve Jobs or whatever, right? Great leaders. What I try to do with my students is get them to understand that is a myth, okay? Leadership is entirely context specific, and beyond context. In our work with theory, we can actually tell you some variables that you can look at to see if that context and that leader fit or what that leader can influence. That's our work, right? So it's theory. This is a theoretical view called Fiedler's contingency theory. And in a nutshell, and I want you guys to take a few minutes with a partner to talk about this. In a nutshell, we can say, hey, there are 3 key factors, and based on whether these show up as this or that, you know what kind of leader you need for that context. So I'm a different kind of leader than maybe Chris Curran. I'm a different kind of leader than maybe Jason Arnold. So depending on how we answer these 3, I might be successful or I might be a complete failure, depending on that context. Now, just go there for a second with me and think, I have to train my students to understand this and to understand it through a theory. And here's the big picture. I want them to walk away with great leaders is a myth. Leader effectiveness depends on key factors. And then your effectiveness as a leader depends on your awareness of those factors. And then lastly, theory to practice. Using Fiedler's model, I want them to walk away with this. And then specifically, I want them to get a firm understanding of leadership style. Yes, that matters. There's 2 types, relational and task-oriented, but that's not it. You also need to know if your schools have these things or your role. That's a lot. So here's your task. I want you guys to take 5 minutes and talk about this. If you had to teach this tomorrow or embed it into a Canvas class, and you have it in front of you here, how were you taught in the past on this? How might you teach and assess this for in-person synchronous class and an asynchronous class? And then how might you teach and assess this for both of those? And then what are the limiting factors? All right. I'm human is first limiting factor, right? But what are other ones? Take 5 minutes and chat about that real quick. And I have these for folks here in person. So what we know is there's just a ton of limiting factors because of that framework or that sort of environmental view that I shared earlier. So now what I want you to do is scan that code real quick. Let me double check that the QR works. I have the link as well. Yes, okay, good. Now, take a look at that. Browse around, go ahead and walk through there. So what we're looking at here is leadership exercises and the pedagogy behind it. So first of all, none of what you saw there is just happening in isolation, right? There's content in the module. This is my work, right? This is what we do all day long. And thanks to ETC, we have an elegant interface to do that. I explain theories and concepts. I tie them to writing. And then there's lectures, of course, that explain all of this. That's our work, right? So from there, though, I develop all of these assessments in multiple parts that have deep context building, and they do a theory review. So what you just saw there wasn't just a PDF. It's explained through a Canvas page or through a Canvas assignment with, yes, that's a lot of text, but keep in mind what you saw is the eventual end product. So also, as you all know, working with asynchronous, more is better than less in most cases. Just explain everything and then you can always distill. But when you leave a lot of gaps, you have issues. And then I do a theory review. Again, it's in the module, but again in the assessment. And then from there, we begin the case study scenarios. So in this particular case, don't judge me right now, all right? Don't judge me. So it's in progress, all right? I'll be done at the deadline. So we take a look at this, you know, it's got the sort of what we would call the synthetic data or the artifacts. And then it has, we'll talk about this instrument where they're collecting their information, and then multiple parts. And this is a key part of this pedagogy, multiple parts. So as you look at this, I want you to think about the difficulty it is. Everything is outsourceable, to be clear. But when you break it and do it this way, it may be more work to outsource than just to actually do the work, all right? But also, hopefully, if it's contextual and relevant, it's also engaging, and that's the goal here. So there's part one, part two, and then part three always is inside out work as a leader. How do you show up? And this is a big part of our program, and what we always do, we give students assessments early on so they understand where they show up as leaders and as human beings, and then where they show up in terms of a whole class and a group. And so they're applying that at the end. So the question then is, how did we get there? And so I want to give you a quick crash course on how that case was built, or how the entire assessment is designed so that, or this exercise is designed so you can do it as well. The first and most important thing is what you guys all have. All right, going back to the bicycle. None of what I'm about to show you could have been done without those IDs that I showed you in the beginning, all right? And the grind and the work and being there and learning it and knowing it, all right? And knowing our students. So background knowledge is absolutely essential. But now, when you begin harnessing AI, or you preferred LLM, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, start a conversation and begin with a crystal clear prompt with an instructor lens. And from there, you share the theories and the application in context. This is an example of a prompt right here. So now let's build exercise 5 as a thoughtful walkthrough involving several parts where students will break down theory to practice elements in segments. The core elements of this activity will be to identify how power is playing out in their context, and then to determine how contingency. All right, I'm going in absolute detail. I can say these are K-12 environments in Florida. We also need to take into account this, 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 and this. Also make sure that it takes into account this, and this, and this. Be absolutely clear on that very, very first prompt. When you begin this conversation and you begin this as a project, you will be able to go back to this and build more studies or more activities that result in that end product that you just saw. Then from there, any questions on that piece right there, just as we think about everybody here, of course, is using prompting in to some degree, but any questions there just roughly, and it's a crash course, but on the prompting here. And again, the key, going back to the bicycle, none of these are really possible without your schema, okay? So if garbage in, garbage out, always with AI, right? And that's how we catch students who are garbage in, right? So the next thing you do is you begin the case build with synthetic data. And I use that term. Let's build with synthetic data. I need a case, so here's how I would say it. Now let's build two really robust scenarios, 2 pages at least, including deeper context, example, and then listen to some of the prompting here. For example, there's an example of an influential teacher that is exerting influence, etc. Or in another case, we see that a leader has been asked to turn around a school and a table depicts 80% of the school is new faculty, all right? What I know is that represents low LMX, low leader-member exchange. Trust levels are extremely low in that environment. But I don't want the students to know that. I don't want the case to say trust is low. I want them to see that synthetic data that I know is what would look like in real life. And I'm telling it exactly. When you give it that kind of schema, when you give your preferred LLM that kind of schema, it knows where you're headed. And so you give it rich schema early on of what you're trying to accomplish. Now look at this, another example here. Improve the letter grade from D to at least a B. In the second scenario, we see that it is a new school. So lots of loose task structure, all right? So the core here, going back to our, what are we after, is we want students to walk away understanding that great leaders are a myth. This one might work in a startup school, but they are not going to work in a turnaround school that has 3,000 students. But it's not that simple. There are these factors, so they're teasing those out. So that's an example of how I used prompting to help design the case study, but then very specific examples to get to the synthetic data. Then, once you've done that, you refine. And here's a couple of examples of refined prompts. I don't think we should include the network or information around power politics. That's giving it away. All right. So I don't, it may have given me an artifact in there. I was like, that's too overt. I need to make sure that the students are not getting any clues. All right. They could work on these in groups, for example. Another example, for the second case, let's provide artifacts or examples that speak to this without explicitly identifying the dynamics. I want them to lift this up in scene 4, informal currents. The formal structure was clear, the informal one less so. In this case, so I look at the data, I look at the artifacts, I look at the case, and I pick up on examples that are just, no, that's not realistic, okay? When a veteran teacher is, when a veteran teacher stands up in front of a school and says something, that's completely different than the new teacher, all right? And that's in the case. That's in the case, right? Because the new or the veteran teacher is emailing the principal and all are attached. It's on the, all right, those are the things that you're putting in there that only a skilled, someone who is doing this at the top and understands the background, hopefully can get this conveyed. And then lastly, you build instruments. And all of these cases and what you see there involve an instrument where they have to capture the data and they have to capture their work throughout the exercise. And this is before they've submitted their reflection or their analysis. So in the assignment, part 3 or part 2 is an analysis where they are applying the theory, examples within the case that they gathered from this, and they are submitting this, they're submitting their analysis, and then they're submitting their personal inside out reflection in this work to get there. So that's an example of how we build those. Any questions on that? I know that's a crash course, but then I'm actually going to just cut to the vibe coded example and then we'll close. I'll leave it quiet for a minute. Any questions at all? Corinne?
How much do you like I'm thinking of Vienna and the rest of it, like where we could easily start to think of these prompts, but then a lot of us get lost on like the beautiful presentation that you have for the student. Like, how important do you feel that is in this new environment? Because we can get these cases and get them to them a lot more easily than we can build like a
The
full way
interface, yeah.
now with great pictures and cool flow and time breaks, and so I think that's something to speak to a little because a lot
Yeah.
of us
Yeah.
are doing this in real time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great question. And the limiting factor is time. That's the complete limiting factor,
My
right?
technological abilities to build a good user interface. Like that's just, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Yeah.
What I always do, and this is how I would convey it to anyone, is I take a software approach to trust, but I also do the same in our own pedagogy and build outs. And I just say version. And even if you look at the bottom of that one, I say version point 0.5.
Mm,
That's not even there yet. And I
okay.
tell the students that. All right. So I would just adopt a philosophy of grace for yourself that your first version is version point 0.1. And my first version was point 0.1, and it may have just been the PDF.
There you go.
But that PDF was built with care and rigor and this. The key value prop for LLMs for us, in my opinion, is the time. Like, I could have probably built this, but it's not really feasible because of time. But by using it to our advantage and being able to provide that key framework, and then it does the busy work, it's that 95% savings in time at least. And I think that is even getting larger. All right. And then the last thing I'll say to that is get that version point 0.1. Once you get a version point 0.2, when you get to about a version point 0.5, because I consider a version 1.0 the perfected version of what I shared that was vibe coded. When that is done perfectly, I feel like that's a 1.0. And I'm like, all right, I'm just there for feedback and I am there to give them an awesome lecture to walk it through. All right. Now, to do that, once you get one or two of these versions point 0.5s, it'll start speeding up, you know? Yes.
Sort of a small point of clarification along that same avenue. To what extent were you using the LLM to create, sort of to put in the content and then have it sort of remix it to create the content you wanted? And to what were you using an LLM also to have to help you code the interface?
Oh, so on the interface side, this really goes back all years now with the ETC. In that, I remember telling Dominic and saying, for my classes, I'm going to be building a tab approach that walks students through theories. But I remember telling Dominic and Jason saying, the future will look like this. So the way I approach it is the LLM support right now is smoothing and refining language, and that's about it. But I look at like the integration of like the interface as really still Canvas based. And I gave you screenshots of what that looks like on Canvas, and it's still very word heavy, right? But it works. The students are okay with more information and being able to read through everything. All right. The next phase, and this is I think the pivot with vibe coding. I thought the next phase would be articulate rise. I really thought it would be like, let's take these and then do rise walkthroughs. But I think that the vibe coding revolution that's right behind, that's coming, and I'm going to show it to you right now, the possibilities are superior.
We should probably define what articulate rise is, just in case anyone is
Yeah.
unfamiliar.
So articulate rise, every time that you guys have to go do a professional development through the university for like our training for our safety trainings,
Mhm.
or suicide prevention or any of that, they're using articulate rise. That's the walkthroughs, and then the person comes in, and that's a good platform. It's a pretty good platform. But what you just saw in my vibe coding example was limitless iteration. I can actually, and I'm going to prove it to you right now by doing one example of a tweak to the platform you just saw. and the speed too, the speed. In this particular example, and we'll go to the vibe coding now, but let me leave open questions about the pedagogy build out approach, and then I'll show you what, and vibe coding, by the way, is just short for AI assisted coding. The kind of things that built that that app that you just saw, that walkthrough. I mean, I don't know, that would have been thousands of dollars to code, and I don't know that anybody, I don't know that that could have been done, period. Yep. I use a program called Replit, and it is, I've been doing portal development for many years, so I have a little bit of schema on how to say where to put certain UX features or whatever, but you don't need it. You don't need it. I mean, I hope this time next year we're doing a vibe code session for the college, and maybe in small teams, we start looking at our curriculum moving in that direction. Yeah.
Do you think vibe coding will be able to quickly help you make it ADA?
100%.
We need it now. Yeah.
Vibe coding would,
That'd be great,
it,
yeah.
there's almost nothing you can't do.
Yeah.
It is, I'm hyperbolic by nature, so I caveat that, but this one is an unlock of the highest order. It's an unlock of the highest order.
Add to that critical.
So there's a lot we could say about limitations, right? But I'll just say that the acceleration piece that we were talking about will continue to put limitations on our human capabilities. So
Yeah.
I'm always like, bicycle, let's get the bicycle. Anything I'm showing you, and this right here, it's not possible with us, without us. And that's the same with ADA components. So real quick, and I'm going to jump to the vibe code so we close on time, but just to give you an example, this is a Replit agent, and this is an example of how you take it to that next level. And when we talk about ADA, all I have to do is basically say, make sure that we include core ADA pieces like this, this, and this. Done.
Right.
It's insane. So what did I do here? All right. So I began with a prompt using Replit, and I said, and I put in my screenshots from my Canvas. I gave it a very, very specific task. All right, we are creating a walkthrough approach. I actually remixed one because I used one for my consulting class where I had students walk through a conversation with a client. I took a real email, anonymized it, and it was us communicating with the client on the delivery of a technology product. And I wanted the students to learn how the team delegates responsibilities to 2 members, and then what language I used with the client to not overpromise, all right, and to do what we do as consultants. When I did this, I wanted to share with the students. I was like, I'll just send them the email. I was like, wait, let me vibe code a walkthrough, and I did it. And this is actually a remix of that. So then I went back to Replit and I said, hey, let's remix that one and do a case study walkthrough. And then voila, we started talking about what makes this possible. And I know that when we walk away, we're all probably like in different places. And I just want to go back to this bicycle piece, but I want to just be clear that none of this is possible unless I and you or all of us keep working to build the code and the trust systems with our students. So whether it's, or even with ourselves, you know, trusting me that I'm not unleashing this, right? Or that I'm not understanding the totality of the case and how it's relevant to our students. We can all fall on different parts of this continuum, and it could be on the monitoring or it can be on the inference of trust. And I think we probably have inference of trust, right? We've worked enough with our students. This will be a tougher and tougher one to get if we don't have them for a long period of time. So what I will close with is just saying everything that I showed you is not possible unless we continue to build the solid source code in our classes and in our pedagogy where it is assumed trust. Maybe it's how we admit, maybe it's how we set the first day of class, maybe it's that first feedback that you give them. That's how you do it. And that's all I'm trying to do. All right. But I know that we have to get to this. So thank you all for seeing this. And then I'll put up the example of my last prompt request, see if it did it. So thank you.